The Ukrainian Air Force says about 100 Russian missiles have been fired at cities across Ukraine, hitting Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, as well as others. Officials say the country is bracing for more attacks. And air raid alerts can be heard throughout Ukraine. The country's foreign minister says this is Moscow's answer to the issue of peace talks. CNN's Sam Kiley is live from Kryvyi Rih, one of the cities targeted. Nick Robertson is in the newly liberated city of Kherson. Good to have you both with us. Sam, I want to start with you. One of the regions that was struck by this barrage of missiles. What more can you tell us?
Well, Linda, the widespread campaign across this country, excuse me, is something close to what we saw, excuse me, back in October, when the infrastructure in the country was hit very, very hard with attacks against electrical power generating areas. In particular, that seems to have been repeated, particularly in Kharkiv. In Kyiv, though, the capital, some residential buildings have been hit, with at least one person reported dead there. There's also been reports of explosions in Lviv, in Mykolaiv. So from the far north of the country to the far south, and here in the middle of the country in Kryvyi Rih, we've also been attacked. According to the local authorities, they've seen off, they believe, most of the missiles. We have heard some very loud explosions. We're not yet sure whether that's outgoing or incoming. Here in Kryvyi Rih, the atmosphere, I have to say, is one of considerable defiance, effectively, with the population largely ignoring the demands from their authorities that they take cover in shelters. But that advice has gone out from the governor in Mykolaiv right through to the governor in Kharkiv and elsewhere in the country. And as far as the authorities are concerned, this has been perhaps the worst, or the second worst, salvo and attempt to break the back of the power generating, the energy infrastructure of this country, which, as winter is now setting in, of course, affects not just the power supply, but the water supply, and of course, ultimately heating, particularly in cities like Kherson, where they've already been very badly hammered and are struggling to get their power supplies back up in any way at all. Linda?
You, Sam, and I do want to go to Nick Robertson, who is in Kherson, the newly liberated city. As Sam was saying, a city already dealing with power outages, and now this barrage of missile strikes, which has not only hit residential buildings, but also infrastructure. What more are you learning about the number of strikes, Nick?
Well, 100 is the figure being given by the Ukrainian Air Force. The impact is an increased number of blackouts, an increased call from officials to people to conserve power, use it sparingly. We understand that about 1/3 of the country's internet is down at the moment. We've seen this already over the past month or so, since that 10th of October beginning of 83 missile strikes on Ukraine's power infrastructure. What Russia has done is degrade it to a point where they could, to about 40% of the power generating capacity was down, or the distribution was down, according to the government a couple of weeks ago, the government vowing to get it back up. And it appeared that the Russians were using that as political leverage, in essence, to say, look, we've degraded it to this point, and if we just press a little bit harder, you now know what we can target, what we can do, and that we can make it much worse. They brought it to the situation where the country was having these controlled blackouts, where it wasn't just the power generating facilities that have been hit, but quite often the switching facilities, the facilities that are the intelligent connections in the network, if you will, the intersections of the power highway that detect and monitor how much power there is in each region, and then balance the system so it can be switched around the country. That's what's been taken out. So in many ways, government officials describe what they're doing at the moment is trying to switch the available power they have sort of on the back roads, if you will, around the country, along the sort of alternate power lines. Russia has been very careful, in particular, in the way that it's. So the attack today is as much a political statement as it is a military strategic power infrastructure statement as well, and that will be how it's read in Kyiv. The reality is the government knows that it's got a very long way to go to repair the power grid. The destruction the Russians wrought here in Kherson today has been described as complete destruction of the power, because they were at the power station and they blew up the two 250-ton generators and shot up the other switching equipment. So this in Kherson won't be coming back online anytime soon. It's completely destroyed, effectively, officials say. Russia is hitting a weak point in the country's system that keeps the country operating, that keeps businesses running, that keeps the heating on. But it hasn't so far damaged the resolve. In fact, the opposite. Every time there are big barrages of strikes like this, people dip into their pockets here and give more money to the military to support them at the front line.
Yeah, everyone in Ukraine wanting an end to this war. Nick Robertson for us in Kherson, Sam Kali in Kryvyi. Good to have you both with us. Thanks very much. Well, the war in Ukraine has cast a dark cloud over this year's G20 summit. Much of the discussion has been on how to end it. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says he has the path to peace in 10 steps, and he presented those steps earlier in a taped address. Well, those steps include food security and nuclear safety, as well as a peace treaty with Russia. He says the time to end the war is now.
We will not allow Russia to wait it out, build up its forces, and then start a new series of terror and global destabilization. I am convinced now is the time when the Russian destructive war must and can be stopped.
U.S. President Joe Biden is trying to get member countries to speak with a united voice in condemning Russia's aggression, as opposed to the current fragmented approach. The president of Indonesia, which is hosting the summit in Bali, says a prolonged war will have implications for years to come.
If the war does not end, it will be difficult for the world to move forward. If the war does not end, it will be difficult for us to take responsibility for the future of current generation and future generations.
Well, for its part, Russia blames the West for the war in Ukraine. At the G20 earlier, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov defended Moscow's actions.
The more often they talk about unprovoked aggression, the more everybody is convinced that this aggression was provoked by them. And it is not an aggression, but an operation to defend the legitimate interests of Russian security, because it is on Russian because of threats on the Russian borders, and to defend the Russian population of Donbass.
Well, Lavrov also claims NATO and the European Union have been participants in what he calls a hybrid war in Ukraine by training troops and helping with intelligence and targeting. MJ Lee is standing by at the G20 summit in Bali. Good to have you with us, MJ. So this is day one of this G20 summit. What exactly does President Biden hope to gain from this summit?
Yeah, you know, as President Biden and his fellow foreign leaders kicked off the G20 summit, there's no question that there wasn't a single issue that loomed larger over the summit than the ongoing war in Ukraine, both just in terms of the destruction within Ukraine, but also the global economic and humanitarian impact that the war has had throughout the year. And I can tell you that senior U.S. officials heading into today, they had said that most G20 members condemned the war in Ukraine. There was sort of a recognition there that there are a handful of countries, G20 members, that haven't always sort of fully and openly condemned this war. We are, of course, talking about countries like China, like India, Saudi Arabia, and even the host countries to some extent, Indonesia. So all of this has sort of been a complicating dynamic, but most G20 leaders and member countries did ultimately end up signing a declaration condemning the war. And obviously this was significant for President President Biden, given that the U.S.'s overarching goal coming to this G20 summit was really to sort of elevate the collective and global voice condemning this ongoing war?